Now headlined by Freddy Peralta, the New York Mets starting rotation may just be the best in the NL East.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On the show today, we're going to be talking about the Mets starting rotation now that they have Freddy Peralta. How good can they be? That's what we're going to be breaking down in the first segment. The second segment, I want to talk about the depth of this rotation, and I'm going to just try to see if they're done adding, or is there still another move to make this group that much better. Then in the final segment, I'm going to compare the Mets rotation to the Braves and the Phillies and try to determine if right now on paper, this is the best rotation in this division. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. Want to find some of my written work? You can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Freddy Peralta has changed the Mets rotation in a significant way because he has given you a true ace that knocks everybody down a slot in the pecking order. If we were looking at the Mets without Freddy Peralta, let's just say they signed Chris Bassett. Well, now it's, who's the ace? Is it Noah McLean in his first season? Probably. That's a lot of pressure to put on a rookie. Are you hoping that Manaea can discover what he was in 2024 again? Are you hoping that Kodai Senga can look like the guy that we saw in the full first half from opening day through June 12th or whatever it was when Pete Alonso threw that ball and Senga leaped and blew out his hamstring? Can he be that guy again? Like, these are all the questions that are so pertinent. It's who's going to lead the rotation. It can't be David Peterson again. He was great last year early on, but by the end of the season, he broke down. How are you going to get through the year without an ace? Now you got one in Freddy Peralta. And while I think some might quibble with the designation of Freddy Peralta as a true ace, because maybe you think your ace has to give you 200 innings. Maybe you think your ace has to pitch into the 7th inning every time. But how many guys do that in Major League Baseball? How many true aces are there if that is our criteria? Pitching into the 7th each time and a 2.5 ERA. Well, Peralta had a 2.7 ERA, but let's just go innings pitched last year. Logan Webb, ace. Garrett Crochet, ace. Christopher Sanchez, ace. All those guys over 200 innings. Max Fried, ace. Carlos Rodon last year, 195 innings, had a 3.09 ERA. Pretty good. Don't know if I'd call him an ace, but pretty good. Kevin Gossman, last year, 3.59 ERA. The way he has pitched largely throughout his tenure with the Blue Jays, I'd still call that an ace because he's led a rotation year after year after year as the guy that's making the opening day start, and he's led playoff teams. He led a team into the World Series. So Kevin Gossman, sure, I'd still call him an ace. Framber Valdez, same thing. You look at a 3.66 ERA, but 192 innings, and he has been the guy who has to lead the rotation, and he's done it. Paul Skeens, obviously ace. Funny that Zach Littell shows up on this. Brian Wu last year was an ace. Hunter Brown last year, certainly an ace. Now, here's where I can understand you looking at Freddy Peralta and say, okay, how much better is Freddy Peralta than a Robbie Ray or a Nick Pivetta? Guys that had somewhat comparable seasons last year as far as innings pitched. Not quite ERA for Robbie Ray, but just guys that get out there and they make a bunch of starts and they have, a high upside. Still, sure, you start to taper off. And if we really wanted to nail down how many true aces are in Major League Baseball, maybe there's only 7 or 8, depending on how strictly you want to, cut off the requirements of being an ace. But for me, if you have been in that #1 spot in a rotation for multiple years and you've led good teams and good rotations, I think you qualify as an ace. And that's been Freddy Peralta. He's going to strike out 200. He might not pitch 180 innings, but he's going to strike out 200 in his 175 innings, and he is going to give you a lot of chances to win baseball games. Last year, Freddy Peralta was 7th in Major League Baseball in ERA among qualified starters. He was 4th in wins. He was 15th in WAR. He was 8th in strikeout percentage. To me, he's comfortably an ace. I would say he's probably a top 15 starting pitcher in baseball, although we still have to make our rankings on that at Just Baseball. So I haven't really made my list to know for sure. But my guess is he's somewhere in the top 15. So that's an ace in my mind. If you're one of the best 15, 20 pitchers in baseball and there's 30 teams, sure, you're an ace. So to me, I think that now changes how we look at each of the next guys that we talk about. Now Noah McLean is your number 2. Love that. 2.06 ERA in 8 starts last year. In huge games where the Mets needed every single win, Noah McLean was dynamite. So that 1-2 punch, I love it. Then you get to David Peterson. Now he's not your 1 or your 2. He's your number 3 starter. Let's not forget, David Peterson pitched to a 2.83 ERA through the month of July. He had a disastrous finish. Over his final 10 starts, that ERA ballooned to 4.22 on the season. But 16 of his 30 starts last year, David Peterson completed 6 innings. 21 of his 30 starts, he pitched into the 6th inning, and he completed at least 5 in 24 of his 30 starts. So if you're looking at a middle of the rotation arm that you want to eat innings for you and make their starts and give you a chance to win and just help your rotation as a whole because he's not going to kill the bullpen, that's David Peterson. Now, Clay Holmes is a great middle of the rotation starter for a different reason. Run prevention, his ability to keep runs off the board. He might be the best 5 and dive starter you'll ever see, but hopefully as a ground ball pitcher, he can grow in that regard this season. He only completed 6 innings in 9 of his 31 starts last year. With that said, he gave up 2 earned runs or less in 22 of his 31 starts and gave up 3 runs in 3 starts. So 25 of his 31 starts, it was 3 runs or less. If all of a sudden Clay Holmes can get through the 6th, there is some upside for more with Clay Holmes. I'm very curious what he looks like in year 2. A 3.53 ERA and 165 and 2/3 innings last year was remarkable for a guy pitching his first full season as a starting pitcher. So we'll see where it goes, but as your number 4, I love the Mets rotation 1 through 4 right now. And then you get to 5 and 6. Guys that were supposed to be your frontline starters last year. Manaea and Kodai Senga. Now look at the lack of pressure that they walk into camp with. It's just get healthy. Be healthy. Be yourselves. You don't have to be the guy that leads this rotation. Neither one of you is going to start on opening day. It's fine. Just go about your business. Get your arm right. Get ready to go and see what happens in the season. But I think Manaea in the past, right, had largely been a back-end starter. If he's there again and he's just overpaid for the role that he's in, that's fine. If he can give you innings and be a solid fifth starter, that expectation right now can be so much lower than what he carried going into last season, what he was carrying in the playoffs in 2024. And still, with the Chris Sale arm slot and everything that we've seen from Manaea, there is still that chance that he could find it again and be much better. And the same thing with Kodai Senga. He was remarkable. The reason the Mets held on till 162 to be eliminated is because Kodai Senga led that rotation through the middle of June as the best rotation in baseball because he was one of the very best starting pitchers in baseball. That wasn't 3 years ago. This was last year. So the fact that those two guys are your 5th and 6th on the depth chart right now, wait till we get to the rest of this division. Because when we're looking at guys like Ronaldo Lopez and Grant Holmes for the Braves, when we're looking at Andrew Painter, who's never pitched in the big leagues, and Taijuan Walker for the Phillies, and that's not even mentioning the fact that 7 through 9 in the Mets depth chart is still really good. It's either current or former top 100 prospects that round out your depth. So, yeah, this rotation's in a really good spot right now. And what I want to talk about next is, are they done? Because they might not need to add anything else for David Stearns and this front office to feel very good about the group of starting pitchers that they are going to welcome in when pitchers and catchers report in a couple weeks. We're going to talk about depth and if the Mets need to add any more here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out the forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms, and they will work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, you can go about your day, and you'll get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver. Personally, I got complicated taxes because it's all self-employed stuff for me. So this just gives me a real peace of mind, knowing that I have an expert handling it and I can just let them take care of it and my taxes will be done right. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert did not file for you last year, you just hit the file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local. Again, that's TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 16,000 subscribers. And I'd love to get there by opening day. All right, so how many starting pitchers do you need to get through a season? It's not 5, I'll tell you that. Last year, the Mets had 11 pitchers who made at least 4 starts. Clay Holmes led the team with 31, David Peterson 30. Those two guys were the only that stayed healthy wire to wire. Kodai Senga made 22, Griffin Canning 16, Tyler McGill 14, Manaea 12, Noah McLean 8, Frankie Montas 7, Jonah Tong 5, Paul Blackburn 4, and Brandon Sproat made 4 starts. Go back to 2024. The Mets had 10 pitchers who made some starts for them, but that also included Joey Lucchesi, who made 2. You had Manaea, Jose Quintana, Luis Severino, all made over 30 starts. David Peterson opened the year on the IL coming off the hip surgery and that recovery process, but once he got back in the rotation, he never looked back. Tyler McGill made 15 starts. Christian Scott made 9. Adrian Hauser and Jose Budo each made 7. And Paul Blackburn made 5. So you put that all together, that was 9 pitchers who made 5 or more starts for the Mets in 2024. 2023, again, 9 starters who were out there. You had Senga, McGill, Peterson, and Carrasco all over 20. Max Scherzer made 19. Justin Verlander, 16. Jose Quintana, 13. Joey Lucchesi, 9. And Jose Budo, 7. So the point is, you need 9 to 10 viable starting pitchers on your depth chart, but you don't need all of them there on opening day. So Jack Wenninger, for example, not going to be ready for opening day. Jonah Tong might not be ready for opening day either as far as being big league ready. I think Tong still needs a little bit of time at AAA. But for Wenninger, he's close. He's going to start this season in AAA. He had an unbelievable season last year in AA. I think he's going to be on a ton of top 100 prospect lists. I think by midseason, if he pitches well in Syracuse, he will be a consensus top 100 prospect in baseball. And Jonah Tong right now is a consensus top 50 prospect in baseball. So those two guys are really exciting. And Christian Scott, a little bit of the forgotten man coming off the dual procedure. He got the internal brace and the TJ at the same time. The Mets were out front saying Christian Scott will not compete competitively in 2025. And that gave him all the time to rest, to rehab, to, I'm sure, toy with the arsenal. So who knows what Christian Scott's going to look like. And that's a guy that I'm really excited to get some eyes on in spring training and just see how the ball is coming out of his hand, because there's a chance that this guy very well could be a big part of this rotation this season. Christian Scott was the best prospect in the Mets farm system when he debuted. Now, this was before, Noah McLean really got going. Same thing with Jonah Tong. Brandon Sproat was having his great season in 2024 when all that was going on. And by the end of the season, obviously Christian Scott had graduated and Brandon Sproat became the top prospect in the system as far as the pitchers are concerned. But having that trio as remember, the Mets already have 6 starters. Having that as your 7 through 9, having not even mentioned Tobias Myers' name yet, the depth's in a pretty good spot right now. Tobias Myers, I think, is probably in the bullpen this year in a bulk relief role. But I think in camp, he stretches out to be a starting pitcher. And he will make some starts, whether that is true starts or if he's the opener and kind of a bulk opener that can maybe give you 3 innings on a bullpen day and then you pass it off to somebody else. That's 10, if not big league starters, close to. I would say right now they have 7 big league starters going into camp because I think Tobias Myers can be a big league starter. And I think that Tong, Scott, and Weniger all very well could be, but maybe all need time in AAA for different reasons. For Weniger, he's never been there before. For Tong, barely was there. For Scott, it's still just a matter of getting acclimated back to true, big league competition or just competition in general. Beyond that, you still have Jonathan Pintaro and you still have Justin Hagenman, who are on the 40, and I believe both have options. I know Pintaro definitely does, and I believe Hageman does as well. You have Brandon Waddell on a minor league deal right now, or maybe it's a split contract. Regardless, he is another guy you could plant in the minors. So you really do have a lot of depth. Cooper Criswell was going to be further depth. They had to DFA him when they made the Peralta Myers trade, so he is now a Mariner, I believe. But regardless, the Mets right now, I don't think they have to touch this rotation. I do like the idea of bringing back Griffin Canning because why not? Apparently he's going to be ready for the start of the season. That shocks me because he tore his Achilles in June of last year, so it's a quick turnaround. But if you could bring him in on a minor league deal or a split deal, that would be amazing. Just have him continue to rehab in a place that he's comfortable. And it seems like the Mets really like the person with Griffin Canning. The problem is for him, I think you want to go somewhere where you can definitely be in the rotation or have a chance to break the rotation. I don't think he's going to go to the Braves because they cut him when they got their hands on him last year. So I don't know if he'd go back there. I'd be curious if he ended up in the division just because of how these things work. Like if the Phillies got their hands on him, I think that'd be a great ad for them, honestly. But if the Mets can pick up Canning, that would just give you one more iron in the fire. And maybe you just, again, I think I said this in the show before, maybe you make some concessions and you tell them, listen, if there's no way for you to get up, to the show and be part of our rotation, we will trade you somewhere where you'll have that opportunity. So we'll see. That's just one name that I think I could see the Mets bringing into the fold because of the relationship and because of the injury and the recovery and maybe the lack of interest from other teams. The idea that the Mets will now turn around and sign Chris Bassett or Jose Quintana, the more I think about it, the more it doesn't make sense. The only way that you do it is if you trade David Peterson or Kodai Senga, then you would need another team to value those guys to a level that I think if that trade was out there, I feel like it would have already been made. Could it still happen? Sure. But if the Mets traded David Peterson and signed Jose Quintana, I don't think that's a direct swap. I think that David Peterson, with where he's at in his career, is a much better option for your rotation than Chris Bassett or Jose Quintana because he's in his physical prime. He's 30. He's in a contract year. He's only making $8 million, and both those guys theoretically should do better. Quintana, because he's signed for like $4.5 million last year. Sometimes when you accept that level of a salary, you sort of pigeonhole yourself. And unfortunately for him, everyone's just going to wait and wait and wait and wait. And they're going to put a $5 million offer in front of him and hope that he takes it. And that's just the unfortunate side of the business. I hope he does better. Regardless of that, I don't know if you're better by trading Peterson and then, having one of those guys that you sign. Now, it just depends on what you get for David Peterson, right? If you're able to trade David Peterson to a team to get an elite reliever and then you turn around and sign one of those guys, I wouldn't say elite, but a reliever with control or a rental reliever, then sure. Like, okay, I can get my mind around then making that trade, but I just don't know if that trade's out there. Kodai Senga, if you get off the money and you find a team that's interested, does that make sense? Maybe, but I like this ceiling of Senga. I like the floor of Peterson. I don't think they should touch this rotation. I really don't. I will say that Chris Bassett seems like an unbelievable leader. I watched him on Adam Ottavino's live stream the other day, and hearing the way he talked about first himself and talked about what he learned from the playoff game he lost with the Mets, where he said he tried to do too much. He got out of himself and he got out of his own game plan, and he was just trying to beat everybody himself without trusting the guys behind him and what he has done in the past. And he sat on that for a couple years, waiting to rectify it. And he did that in the postseason this year. Didn't even get a chance in the beginning, but came on very strong in the ALCS and the World Series. I would love Chris Bassett, but I think he's going to want to start. And you might not have a spot for him to start. Even though he's a great leader, I think he'd really mentor some of your young arms. Just isn't going to happen. And that's why the addition of Peralta is so great, because he has been that guy, even though he's younger than Manaea, he's younger than Senga, probably younger than Peterson as well. But yeah, Peterson's already 30. So, but Peralta, because he's been on such a young team with such a young staff, he has been that guy. So I think you have between Peralta, Manaea, even Holmes to a certain extent, he's not as polished or not as um, experienced as a starting pitcher. He's still a vet. So I really think that this rotation is in a very good spot, and you don't have to do anything else. And I don't think they're going to go out and sign Framber. I think your best case scenario would be getting a Nick Martinez type, where it's a guy that can pitch out of the bullpen, but can then jump back into the rotation in a pinch. I just don't know what it costs to get a Nick Martinez. I don't know if he would want a role with the Mets with the rotation this crowded, or he'd prefer to go somewhere where he can have a little more of a starting role and maybe make a little more money, not only this year, but on his next contract if he pitches well. So I don't think the Mets have to do anything this rotation. I really don't. If Griffin Canning wants to come back and you can sign him and help him with his rehab, awesome. More depth. If you can sign anybody on a minor league deal, great, more depth. But when you have a pretty good 1 through 9 on paper right now, roll with that. I think you're fine. So the question then becomes combination of depth and your potential when it comes to your best starting 5. Do the Mets have the best rotation in this division? That's where we're going to close the show in just a minute. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now it's time to take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everyday Club and get Locked On Mets without the interruptions. You can also get access to our Discord channel where you can chat with other Mets fans, and you also get access to a merch shop. If you want to be part of the Everyday Club, go to lockedonmets.supercast.com, or you can also check the link in the episode description. All right, so let's look at the Mets and compare them to other rotations in this division. I want to start with the Braves. The Braves have the chance to have the best rotation in this division, but they got a lot of question marks. Chris Sale, coming off an injury plague season. Spencer Schwellenbach, coming off a season where he had a freak injury, fractured his elbow. I thought it was a comebacker. No, apparently he was just throwing too hard and his elbow got fractured. So that's an interesting one. Sale, you might remember, fractured his ribs. And I hate to say rightfully so. That sounds so messed up. But do you remember that game that Chris Sale fractured his ribs? Because as a fan, I was so frustrated by the Braves and the way they kept on just lining up their rotation to screw over the Mets. It's just, you got to make sure that we get Sale and Schwellenbach in front of those lineups as much as we possibly can. And Chris Sale, in a game where I feel like the Braves, I don't even think they needed him at that point. Like Chris Sale, injury. What was it? It was, I'm very curious. So he was at 8 inning. He was the 9th inning. Juan Soto. Right now, just trying to see the score of this. And Chris Sale, as a tryhard, dives. Yeah, they're winning 5-0. 5-0. Like, come on, 5-0. And they kept Chris Sale in the game for the 9th inning, and he made the diving stop, and he fractured his rib. Regardless, Chris Sale, I mean, injury history there is well reported. So if you get the best of Chris Sale, the best of Spencer Schwellenbach, and if Spencer Strider can return to old form instead of what we saw last year, which was an ERA of almost 4.5, that trio is better than the Mets' best version or best outcome of their best trio. I will say, if Senga is at his best and it's Senga, Peralta, McLean, it's actually closer than you would think. And there's the difference with the addition of Peralta. Because I would take Peralta and McLean over Sale and whoever you want to say the two is. Probably Sale and Schwellenbach. Because I think the questions with those guys, I know McLean's a rookie, but I am so bullish on what McLean can be this year that I really think that the Mets are sitting in a great spot when you take the combination of their upside and their floor, because you look at the depth for the Braves. Beyond that trio, Ronaldo Lopez coming off shoulder surgery. I don't even know if he should be a starting pitcher. They should just stick him in the bullpen. Hurston Waldrop was very good last year as a rookie. So that's a solid 4 in my eyes. I would knock Lopez down to the 5. Grant Holmes was pretty good last year. I would just go with that as my starting 5, but I think for the Braves, with the injury risk that's present throughout the rotation, you stretch all those guys out and you see where it goes. They have some good pitching prospects. They have Didier Fuentes. They have Giancarlo Lara. They have J.R. Ritchie. Those are all good pitching prospects. Are any of them as good as Jonah Tong? No. So the Mets and Jack Wenninger is not quite as good as a J.R. Ritchie or a Lara, I think, but we have both those guys in our top 100 right now, but it's not like drastically different. So I look at their depth, and when you count out 10 starters for the Braves, one of them is Bryce Elder. And if Bryce Elder makes starts for the Braves, and he has pretty consistently still, that's a good thing for the Mets because he has been awful. So I look at this Braves rotation, I say it's close. It's close because of the potential of their top 3. Sure, they could have the best rotation in this division. I wouldn't take them right now, though. I need to see them make it through camp and see what it looks like. Then we get to the Phillies. I would say Christopher Sanchez and Jesus Luzardo off the season that they both just had, it would be fine to say, okay, that's the best duo in this division, but not by much. And that's largely because Christopher Sanchez, at this point, you almost have to put him in like the top 5 starting pitchers in baseball, which sounds crazy because if you just watch him throw a bullpen, you might not see it, but then you actually watch him in games and watch the way this guy eats innings and everything else. He's really good. He's really good. And Luzardo is also really good, but there's injury risk with Jesus Luzardo. That's been the theme throughout his career. If Zach Wheeler is right, and that's their 1 through 3, yeah, that's probably the best this division has to offer, but you're still waiting to see on Wheeler. Apparently he's healthy. He could be back by opening day, which would be remarkable. And I'm rooting for him because I've never rooted against Zach Wheeler, the person, because he was one of my favorites with the Mets. And I still think it's one of the biggest mistakes this franchise has ever made, letting him go. And if you were a Locked On Mets listener back in 2019, man, did you hear about it? Did you hear about the fact that they should have been extending Zach Wheeler in 2019? I don't even need to go over all that again. But the point is, because Wheeler has some uncertainty, because Luzardo has an injury history, because you don't have Ranger Suarez and Aaron Nola's coming off a season where his ERA was over 6 and only made 17 starts, this Phillies rotation's a little bit suspect. Taijuan Walker is their 5. Well, actually right now, because Zach Wheeler is still listed as maybe not available on opening day, he's their 4, and Andrew Painter's their 5. Andrew Painter's one of the better pitching prospects in baseball, but he had a 5.40 ERA last year. I know they think he's big league ready and he can contribute this season, but it's not a guarantee that he's going to come off a down year in AAA. Granted, he was finally healthy, but he's going to come off of that and just be awesome. He might be, but it might be growing pains still. And there's like no depth beyond that. That's 6 starting pitchers with one of them already being hurt and trying to come back, and hopefully he will. And Wheeler with Painter, who hasn't pitched in the big leagues and has an injury history, and Taijuan Walker being in that mix. This is a team that needs to add a starting pitcher. And I don't know if they have the budget to do so, but the Phillies need to add an arm. That's why I mentioned the Canning thing. Like, I wouldn't want Griffin Canning to go there because they need back end starting pitching. The Mets combination of frontline potential arms with, of course, Peralta, McLean, but the upside that's present with Manaea and Senga, and even to some respects, Holmes. I still think there's another gear for Holmes and Jonah Tong. With the depth that the Mets possess, I really think they are in the best spot going into spring training in this division. I do have to throw an honorable mention to the Marlins. I can't go through an episode where we're talking best rotations in the division and not even utter the Marlins because they have a lot of depth. I think Senga is going to be a lot better. Yuri Perez is still only 22 and one of the most talented arms in the game. Braxton Garrett may be finally healthy. Jack Jansen Junk had a nice season last year. They have other pitching prospects that should be ready at some point this season. When you look at, the top of their system with, Robbie Snelling and Thomas White, like there is a lot there to like with the Marlins, but we gotta see a lot of those ifs come through too. So right now, I do think the Mets have the best rotation in this division. I don't think they have to add to it. And I'm excited to see what it looks like in camp. I think this is one part of the team that obviously you're going to keep your options open. You can't say that you're never going to add another arm, but I don't think they should. I don't think they should be adding more pitchers to block a Jonah Tong or a Christian Scott or, Tobias Myers. I think Tobias Myers as a guy that's fighting for a job at camp is better than most that you're going to find in free agency at this stage of the game. Because a guy like Chris Bassett doesn't want to fight for a job in camp. So I think the Mets are in a very good spot after the addition of Freddy Peralta. That's why you make the trade. That's why you give up Brandon Sproat and Jet Williams. Because you get a guy that instantly made everybody else in this rotation better just by his presence because no one else asked to do as much as they were going to be asked to do before you picked them up. So we'll see where it takes the Mets bullpen. Maybe there's still some more work to be done, but not a ton. We'll be going through this roster still as we gear up for spring training that's fast approaching. And there's so many different storylines that we will be covering and looking into with the New York Mets. Can Marcus Semien and Luis Robert bounce back? Who's a better bet to? I have a lot of ideas what we can be talking about on the show. Not entirely sure if I'm going to do a Sunday show or maybe take one day off this week. We'll see. Certainly, if there's any news to react to, I will be on here. And if I just find a topic that I'm really dying to talk about, and I got some free time tomorrow night or tonight as you're listening to this, then maybe I will do so. But again, I appreciate you all for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you are watching on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.